Dan Harmon is the writer and creator behind 3 of my favorite shows: Community, Rick and Morty, and the one I want to talk about today because it demonstrates how storytelling is, like any other skill, something you can practice until it becomes an instinct. Let's talk about Harmonquest! So here's the premise for the show. Dan Harmon gets together with some comedians to play an off-brand version of Dungeons and Dragons. They improvise their way through a familiar fantasy story of monster slaying and magical object hunting, the broad strokes of which are invented by Spencer Crittenden, the Dungeon Master.
So which one? You got non-lethal arrows, good aligned arrows, sleep arrows,
You have
V
this
arrows.
memorized? I don't understand what's happening.
I'm a Dungeon Master!
The live recording is edited down into digestible 20-minute chunks, and then animators bring their adventure to life. The result is really funny, but it's not just funny. It's solid storytelling, too. Because with Harmon, it's almost as if he can't resist. He can't resist elevating the story. Here's what I mean. So in episode 2, the gang's fighting a demonic version of Chelsea Peretti when this happens.
Something about the ghost's smoky form seems to stave off your blows.
I run.
What? Fondue?
It's a character development thing.
This line gets a laugh, but it also reveals the difference between what Harmon is doing and what his co-hosts are doing. Now, don't get me wrong, Aaron McGathy and Jeff B. Davis are hilarious on this show, but I think the gear that is turning in their minds as they play is, how do I make this funnier? While the gear that's turning in Harmon's head is, how do I make this more compelling? In reality, all 3 of them are probably thinking both thoughts, so it's really more a difference of degrees. But those degrees make a difference because as a result, the arc of the story bends towards Harmon's character. And I end up knowing way more about Fondue Zubag than I do Bayoro Shift or Boneweevil. Yeah, the show loves characters with ridiculous names.
What's your character's name?
Teflonto.
I am Han Judgment.
My name is Hawaiian Coffee.
By calling attention to his own character development, Harmon turns scenes that would otherwise be just about hacking monsters to death into scenes about overcoming cowardice. And I think that's important because doing that is contradictory to what the appeal of a role-playing game is. Dungeons and Dragons and other games like it are ultimately power fantasies. You enter the game, overcome obstacles, and get stronger along the way. If that's all that happens, it can be an incredibly fun and rewarding experience for the player. But that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be fun for the audience. Harmon's decisions, on the other hand, deliberately make his character weaker. He has an internal flaw to fight against, and that gives the story a much more dramatic meat to work with later on. In The Anatomy of Story, John Truby lays out 22 steps that he argues most stories take, and one of the most important steps he calls weakness and need. A story is really about a character overcoming their weakness and discovering what they really need. In the case of Fondue, he overcomes cowardice and realizes that what he needed all along was friendship. The way the show resolves all of this is a little bit forced.
True hero is courageous. Knock that shit off.
Then I'll be brave from now on.
But the point here isn't that each element is executed perfectly, but that the elements of a good story are all here, even though this is an improvised story. This is also something that Spencer Crittenden recognized when putting the show together. Usually when you're designing a campaign or adventure, you don't plan what they're going to do or what kind of arcs they're going to go on because that's the stuff that players bring to the table. But because this is going to be consumed as a TV show, we figured that we wanted to spend a little bit more time making sure that the story had arcs. And that's what led me to the idea that Dan's character didn't have a father.
Fondue, your father left you when you were young, right?
Yeah, but I like to be the one to share that.
The show is able to get a lot of mileage out of that relatively simple wrinkle in the story. And if you're following along with John Truby's book, you'd call this step the ghost. It's an open wound that is often the source of the hero's psychological and moral weakness. Now, it's entirely possible that Spencer was also behind the idea to make Harmon's character a coward, but there are a bunch of other examples of Harmon making deliberate choices to refocus the story on dramatic internal conflict throughout the show.
I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna be one of those cowards that lies about being a coward. I'm gonna be brave and tell you I'm a coward.
I don't want to be here.
It's just market demand.
Well, here's my market demand.
some personal space, and I storm off. The other guys, they think I'm useless, you know, because I react naturally to things. I have feelings.
And Aaron and Jeff do this too when they become frustrated by Fondue's cowardliness.
I just know that I have more than pulled my weight.
Again, it's difficult to say with certainty what was part of the pre-planning and what was improvised, but if you look at Harmon's podcast, Harmontown, there is even more evidence of him doing this. On the podcast, Harmon and Jeff regularly play Dungeons & Dragons, and pretty early on, Harmon is leaning towards drama, conflict, and planting the seeds for character growth.
Let's set up camp and just get to know each other. Let's just build a little fire and let's just talk about our backstory.
All right.
My father, actually, in point of fact, was a barbarian like you. Sometimes I wish I could launch into a rage like you and just like make everything okay.
I think there's two lessons for writers to take away from all this. First, that what is entertaining for a creator might not necessarily be entertaining for an audience, and that you want to mine deeply into your character's weaknesses and fears to create compelling internal and external conflict, instead of creating characters where we're just indulging in their awesomeness. Even the James Bond franchise figured this out with the Daniel Craig movies. And two, that eventually storytelling will come naturally. Dan Harmon has written hundreds of TV episodes, so he's at the point where he can't not hit the beats he knows have to be there on instinct. I think it's pretty common for writers, or for anyone trying to do anything creatively, to feel overwhelmed by how much information there is to absorb about their craft. If you tried to keep all of it in mind at once, you'd never write a word. But if you continue to study, continue to practice, it will eventually recede into your subconscious and make the telling as natural as breathing. In Dan Harmon's own words, "You know all of this instinctively. You are a storyteller. You were born that way." Hey guys, so if you want to watch Harmonquest, you can do so with Verve. I want to thank Verve for sponsoring this video, since I've been meaning to talk about Harmonquest for a while now, and this was a lot of fun to do. So hit the link in the description of this video and you can get a 30-day ad-free trial of Verve. I think Verve is a really cool concept for a streaming service. The combo pack brings together a bunch of channels that you may have already heard of, including Crunchyroll, Funimation, Rooster Teeth, Mondo, and more. So it's a great way to discover content from the creators you already love. I've been working my way through Attack on Titan and it's been amazing, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. And again, use the link in the description to get that 30-day ad-free trial. Also, this video referenced Harmontown, the documentary about Dan's podcast tour, so if you're interested in Dan, I'd also recommend checking that out for a really revealing behind-the-scenes look. As always, keep writing, and I'll see you soon with a new video.